This Late Night Linux Family podcast is made possible by our patrons. Go to latenightlinux.com/support for details of how you can join them. Support us on Patreon for access to ad-free episodes and early releases. That's latenightlinux.com/support. 2.5 Admins, episode 276. I'm Joe.
I'm Jim.
And I'm Alan.
And here we are again. And before we get started, your customary Clara article plug, Alan, is ZFS-enabled disaster recovery for virtualization.
Yeah, so in this one, Jim walks through all the powerful tools that ZFS has for disaster recovery in a virtualized environment and basically walks you through setting up snapshots, replication, and automating things with Sanoid and Syncoid to get a fully covered virtualization environment.
Right, well, link in the show notes as usual. The VPN panic is only getting started. So this is an article from The Verge about how you've got things like the Online Safety Act in the UK, where now websites offering any sort of adult content are requiring users to verify their age, and how obviously loads of people get around that with VPNs. And now there are rumblings of governments trying to crack down on VPNs and somehow ban them. I don't see how that's possible, but it certainly looks like they want to try.
I don't think it's possible to ban VPNs. It is certainly possible to force VPN manufacturers to pull a few more of the stops out. Because right now, it's relatively easy to break most VPNs because they require the ability to communicate on odd, unusual ports, and you can identify their traffic that way. You don't need anything all that fancy. You just need to know that whatever that weird UDP port is you're talking to, I don't like that. No. But there's nothing actually stopping somebody that wants to implement a VPN from actually doing a no-kidding VPN over HTTPS. And at that point, no, you really can't block it.
Well, reading the article and looking at the types of people that are complaining about this and being like, well, why didn't the government consider VPNs when they wrote the law? I expect they're going to do things more like try to convince Apple to not list the VPN apps in the App Store and things like that, and just make it difficult for non-tech users to find VPNs. Most of what they were looking at is like, oh, these 4 VPNs became the 4 of the top 10 apps in the App Store suddenly in the UK because everybody wanted a VPN. And so I expect rather than actual technical countermeasures convincing ISPs to block random UDP ports and so on, it will be just harangue the couple of walled gardens that control the app stores for these general consumer devices to just not list VPNs.
Yeah, but then all of tech YouTube will just collapse as an economy.
More likely, all of tech YouTube will suddenly start producing a new how to install VPNs in the UK video every single day, all complete with gawping thumbnail pic.
Maybe.
How to sideload the VPN because you can't get it from the App Store.
Yeah.
And I mean, realistically, that is, what winds up happening. If you have a government that starts trying to crack down on VPN apps, is you just teach your users how to circumvent those issues. It's kind of like the Pirate Bay. The fortunes of the Pirate Bay don't increase and decrease along with efforts at suppressing it. They increase and decrease along with the streaming companies actually trying to do a good job and provide a service people want to pay them for.
Yeah.
But this is not just the UK. Lots of countries are looking to enact similar legislation and similar crackdowns on age verification stuff.
Oh, sure. You lot are just leading the way. I mean, this is probably on the way in my own country as well. I haven't heard any more rumblings than usual lately from, various ne'er-do-wells in the U.S. government about cracking down on encryption technologies, which obviously VPNs are, one facet of. But we have some of the same resurgence in morality that leads to this kind of thing over here. Now, it's not the entire country over here. It's a smattering of, what we call our red states, the ones with more conservative governments. But several of those have required age checks as well. And, the net effect has been that they've gotten geo-blocked, basically. The porn sites either ignore the requirement entirely, or they use IP geolocation to just refuse service inside those states. So you give it a minute, and it's not going to take that much longer before we start seeing the same thing over here. Now, I guarantee you we've already got a spike in VPN usage for exactly that reason. I didn't come prepped with articles talking about it. I'm sure I could find some in, no time. But yeah, ultimately, you can only do what the population is going to allow you to do. And when what you want to do is suppress something that huge swaths of your citizens want, the net effect you're going to actually have is not suppressing the thing. It's going to be doing something else.
Yeah, as with most types of prohibition, it's just going to push things underground rather than actually stop any of the behavior.
Well, exactly. Like in the UK, it's forced a lot of people to use shady VPNs, like free ones that end up using your connection for all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, and not specific to VPNs, but we're also seeing this kind of being attacked from the other end, where governments in countries like India are trying to force phone manufacturers to bundle government cybersecurity software into the phone and be like, yeah, you can't come on our phone network unless you have this spyware.
So tell me more about VPNs over HTTPS. Like, can you just run something like WireGuard with port 443 there?
Not WireGuard, because WireGuard is UDP only. And it's UDP only because TCP-based VPNs don't perform well. And the whole design purpose of WireGuard was not, region hopping and pretending you're somewhere you're not. It was the highest performance, lowest cost way to securely encrypt, data between any two endpoints. So WireGuard's not your solution for that. There are TCP-capable VPNs out there. OpenVPN is one of them. You can run OpenVPN on TCP 443. Now, with that said, that's not the instant fix that you might naively think it is, because the kinds of devices that are willing to do deep packet inspection will immediately recognize the difference between an HTTPS connection and an OpenVPN initiation that happens on TCP 443. But again, with that said, if your actual goal is to, no kidding, bypass, this type of detection, and you're willing to sacrifice some performance for it, you can literally just encapsulate network traffic over a perfectly valid, perfectly legitimate HTTPS connection. And once it's established, it's fully encrypted. You can't see what's going on inside it. It does whatever it needs to do, whatever it wants to do, and you have no way of knowing. That's the way it works regardless, like even with, OpenVPN in TCP mode. But the difference is, if you're actually using HTTPS and not just another TCP, encrypted whatever running on the same port, you can't tell the difference just from looking at the traffic. You basically have to have already decided, I don't like this subnet because I know this subnet is hosting these HTTPS-based VPN endpoints, and I don't want to allow my users access to that.
But what you're telling me is, performance aside, there's no technical limitation here.
No, there's really not. There are things that it wouldn't work very well for. Like, you would not want to do gaming over such a connection because the latency would suck. But like streaming video, it'd work a treat. You would use a little bit of additional bandwidth, because of the basically because of the need to encode, one TCP session into another. You will use some additional bandwidth, but the latency won't freaking matter because it's streaming. It might take you an extra second or two, like for your movie to start playing, maybe, but like that's the extent of your witness performance problem. And given that what we're really talking about here is not VPNs in general, but VPNs specifically as a way to avoid region locking, well, I mean, streaming is what people usually want to do the absolute most when region hopping is the goal.
Yep. To the point of, why didn't they think of VPNs before? It's like, I think they did, but realized there's not that much they can do about it.
Yeah. And the idea of just banning VPNs is just ludicrous.
It is ludicrous, but that doesn't mean that nobody will try it.
I suppose, yeah.
Do you not remember when it was illegal to rip DVDs and people were walking around wearing DCSS printed T-shirts with the, 96 bytes of code necessary to bypass that, quote, encryption, unquote?
Stealthy browser extensions waited years before infecting 4.3 million Chrome and Edge users with backdoors and spyware. Echoes of Geotan.
A little bit. It's a little unclear whether this was a legitimate extension that had been around for a while and they got abandoned and got hijacked, kind of like the Geotan type thing, or if it was one that set out from the beginning to get popular, wait, and gotcha. Both are possibilities. Knowing what we do about people in general and delayed gratification, it's more likely it's the kind of a hijack thing, but it could be either.
Well, if it's a state actor, then it's more likely to be the former to me.
Entirely possible, yeah.
Well, and it's not just one thing. I mean, this was at least 5 different extensions we know of coming from the same threat group, and they all followed essentially the same playlist. I think the thing that makes this interesting is that these were not just extensions that pretended to provide a function that a user might want, and instead, you're just immediately Trojan horse, there's nothing there but the bad thing. They were actual useful extensions that did things that people wanted them to do and also did the bad stuff. And in some cases, waited to start doing the bad stuff, so you get kind of the sleeper campaign. And I feel like certainly, my memories of the early 2000s, which were just the absolute worst for malware and spyware. Like it would be a very unusual day not to come across 10 different spyware infestations, as an IT professional in the early to mid 2000s.
Or sit down at somebody's browser and they have 8 toolbars and you're like, what the actual hell is going on here?
Yeah. That kind of thing was common. And, the kinds of payloads that those spyware, malware, whatever you want to call them, extensions utilized, they did the same things. They reported on everything that you did on the internet back to the mothership so it could try to send you ads better, and or it tried to inject ads. It's all the exact same things that this stuff does. So the real interesting part is just that the group running the campaign appears to have been going for more of a slow burn so that they could infect more people, get more out of them, and just basically wring more juice out of the orange before you throw the pulp away.
Yeah, I think gain people's trust is the key thing. You install an extension, it does what it's supposed to do, and you don't really think about it. You trust that, okay, well, that's it forever. Whereas the reality is that either it can be hijacked or it was the plan all along, but it can be updated, and often updates can slip through unnoticed by the browser manufacturers, and then suddenly you've got something that is nefarious.
Well, I think especially the kind of verified status on the publisher is maybe the level of verification there is not that high, but is easy in particular for a state actor to be able to get verified. But also, a plugin that has especially the popular status and so on, they don't check every update, right? Like when something gets added to app stores, there's often some extra checking that happens to try to make sure it's not malware. But the updates that come after that generally don't get that. So it's very easy for them to kind of throw a switch and change an application from being benign to being malicious.
Well, Google does check every update, supposedly, with automated checks, but you have to assume that it's not quite as thorough as the initial checks.
Yeah, and even those initial ones are mostly automated because even if they had a human doing it, what do you check for in most of these apps? And especially like these ones had anti-analysis things in them, right? If you opened up developer tools while the plugin was running, it would change what it was doing back to being benign. It would only do bad things when you weren't looking.
Yeah, which suggests this isn't just like script kiddie level. This is more sophisticated.
No, definitely not. Whether it's nation state or just APT, I mean, this is a professional campaign. This is somebody who is not just looking for a, get rich quick, like easy, fast payout and be done. This was, like I said, somebody looking to wring all the juice.
Yeah, you do wonder if they're targeting a specific subgroup of people and just getting everybody else as a bonus, or if this is just a wider campaign.
But the wider point here is that just because you can trust software right now doesn't mean that you can trust it forever.
No, absolutely not. And moving back a little bit to the whole, who's running it and, why thing, I have no idea, what Shady Panda's real goals are or who its, customers are, but I have to think if I wanted to be an immoral asshat these days, I would probably start a campaign like that and start quietly offering the sale of that data to nation states around the world that might not want to get caught running that operation, but would want that data on their own citizens very, very much. And that's the kind of thing that governments do all the freaking time. Oh, our laws prevent us from spying on our citizens, so that's okay. We'll indulge in a little, you get mine and I'll get yours and get some other country to spy on our citizens, and then we'll return the favor.
Yeah, subcontracting, essentially. FreeBSD 15 has been released. You must be terribly excited, Alan.
Yeah. Big news on this one is that you can upgrade FreeBSD itself using the package tool now, so that both the operating system and the third-party packages are all managed with one manager now.
And that is an option in the installer. You can do it the old way if you want.
Yes, for now, because if there was a problem, we didn't want to leave it broken. Other big things, some of which myself or Clara had a hand in, are it's now possible to build all of the release artifacts, including the install images, the ISOs, the VM images, etc., without needing to be root on the system you're building them on. It can all be done automated in CI without root now. Other big things is FreeBSD now has native support for iNotify. So any applications, especially Linux applications you might be running that use iNotify to watch a directory or see change files will all just work natively now without having to use the libiNotify. And FreeBSD 15 is the first operating system to ship with the new OpenZFS 2.4. So all the latest features of ZFS are available in FreeBSD 15, and it's the first OS to release with them. And it includes updates to OpenSSL and OpenSSH to distribute the recently standardized quantum-resistant algorithms for that. And one other big thing on the storage side, improvements to the NFS server in FreeBSD. It now supports the NFS 4.2 clone operation so that if you basically ask over NFS to clone a file, it will use ZFS's BRT feature to do the same cloning.
Ooh.
Let's do some free consulting then. But first, just a quick thank you to everyone who supports us with PayPal and Patreon. We really do appreciate that. And if you want to send any questions for Jim and Alan or your feedback, you can email show@2.5admins.com. Another perk of being a patron is you get to skip the queue, which is what Alexander has done. If you have a bunch of services running in separate VMs, Nextcloud, Image, Mattermost, Jitsi, etc., do you run a single Postgres VM to service them all? Or do you bundle the service VMs with their own instance of Postgres? What about for Redis, RabbitMQ, and the like?
I generally prefer to just go ahead and have a separate database instance for each one of those applications. I mean, all the things that you're talking about are essentially designed to function as appliances in the first place. So I prefer to roll with that approach and say, okay, rather than I have to think about and independently manage all these different pieces of this stack, it's been designed as an appliance that's ready to go. It's not Postgres plus a million different libraries, plus this, plus that, plus the other. It's image. And so you just that's all you really have to think about is this is image. So I generally prefer to deploy them that way. Basically, the only time that I get into a discrete database deployment as opposed to just using one, inside a container or a VM is when I want management at the database level. I'm going to be doing a fairly significant amount of that. And it will genuinely be in the database console, not just messing around with it, with the actual application, but no, I fully anticipate getting into a console and executing SQL queries to manage and find things out about this application. That's the point at which I generally am going to want a separate discrete VM or server or container or whatever that's running that database, when it really is almost it's a necessary part of the stack, yes, but it's also something you interact with directly, and therefore it's kind of worth tackling on its own.
Yeah, I think kind of to the same point, the advantage of having the Postgres in each VM is if you decide to move the Nextcloud VM to a VPS somewhere or just a different server in your house or whatever, the database goes with it and everything's fine. Also means that if you're ready to upgrade to Postgres, the next version, and Image isn't ready yet, but Nextcloud is, you don't have a problem of, well, what do I do here? Or I have to coordinate updating Nextcloud, Image, Mattermost, Jitsi, etc., all at the same time when I'm upgrading my Postgres, as opposed to each of them being their own thing. So there's a lot of advantage to embedding it into each VM or container, but at some point, if you are actually trying to do DBA type stuff like Jim was talking about, or just you're going to have that many different databases, or the load on the database is enough that you want to have it have dedicated resources, like if Nextcloud, Image, Mattermost, etc., all don't need a lot of RAM, but the database does, then there might be cases where you would want to break the database out and have it have, its own dedicated CPU cores or run it on SSDs while the rest of the applications are on hard drives or something like that. But those are much more special cases. I think in the general case, it makes sense to just have it bundled. And oftentimes, with the way the application ecosystem is moving, you don't install Nextcloud manually. You get a Nextcloud Docker or container or script or VM, like appliance image. And so it's already going to be baked in there anyway. and it's maybe even part of the upgrade mechanism and so on. And so there's a lot of cases where you would not even really have the option of splitting it out. And as much as I don't always agree with that, for an appliance type thing, like Jim said, if it was meant to be an appliance, you will have a much better time if you continue to treat it as an appliance instead of try to treat each of them as it is, a regular Linux server where I'm going to go and mess with the packages on it, or even just mess with the config to point to an external database.
Definitely. It's probably also worth mentioning that, possibly counter to some people's intuition, running the database inside the container or VM with the application, that is the high performance way to go. When you silo everything and you've got your application running, in one stack and your database running in a different stack, and you've got to communicate between the two, you introduce latency issues. In addition to the latency issues, you're also introducing CPU overhead. So if you're running close to the wire on, how much compute you've got available to allocate, you're going to be wasting some of it on context switching. If you're crossing even container barriers, that's the cheapest version of this, basically. If you've got your database in one container and your application in another container, to get the two to talk, you're going to wind up having to use the database's network communication stack rather than its local one. And if you're not doing too much, will you notice the difference? Probably not in that particular case, but nevertheless, you're introducing a bunch of CPU context switches you would not have had to if you hadn't siloed it away. And the difference gets considerably more stark when you leave the container world and you start talking about full-on VMs or even full-on separate hardware servers. Now you are really, genuinely, no kidding, having to talk across a network, and you have introduced some serious both latency and potentially throughput bottlenecks that, again, you would not have had running everything as a server in a bottle with all the pieces inside the same container or VM.
And there's some security considerations too. If you're running the database inside the VM or container with the application, it can maybe connect over a Unix socket that's never exposed to the network at all. Whereas if it's going to be in a different container or VM, then it's going to be listening on a port. Now that may be on a local network and is not widely exposed, but there is some disadvantage possibly to putting all of your eggs in one basket here as well. If there is an exploit for Nextcloud, they can only get your Nextcloud database. Whereas if you do a separate dedicated Postgres, now if there's an exploit for Nextcloud, it also affects your image database, your Mattermost database, your Jitsi database, etc.
And even above and beyond the whole, if they get you thing, we talk a lot on this show about single points of failure. Well, if you silo away one great big Postgres DB that you expect 10 different applications all to access, guess what? You introduced a single point of failure that can bring down all 10 applications at once. Whereas again, if they are running as, individual appliance in a bottle with their own database install in each one, then one of them breaking doesn't bring all the rest down with it.
This idea of having just a single database instance strikes me as very old-fashioned, like maybe 20, 25 years ago when computing hardware wasn't up to running multiple instances of the database at once. But now, that's just not a problem.
It used to make a lot more sense because we all used to be a lot closer to engineers under the hood. You kind of had to be on the internet. So, if you had any kind of serious website, you were going to have a MySQL instance running. And if you were running one website, you were probably going to run multiple websites. So, it's just kind of normal in your head to I have my Apache and I configure all the websites in there. And I've got, my MySQL and I configure a new, database for each one of my sites in there. And, I'm just used to I have to tie these things together and this is how that works. But that's not really the mentality anymore. Nobody's really looking to build a site from scratch and hand manage the server configs and all that kind of thing. They're more looking for the easiest way to go from, zero to thing I want. The abstraction layer has moved further north. It used to be the database engine itself you might consider a great big abstraction because it's this thing that you don't have to deal with the logic of in order to be able to arbitrarily store and retrieve data. So that's an abstraction. Now we don't usually think of it as an abstraction. We think of the database as a concrete thing, and we're looking really hard to be able to abstract that away from us as well. And I would argue that a lot of people are looking at abstracting the abstractions away. That's even before you get into, the AI nonsense that we're all dealing with, which is the ultimate example of, look, just abstract everything away. I just want to tell you, make me happy and have you do it.
Yeah, but kind of to Joe's point, I remember the day where what we now can buy as a VPS for $5 was the whole server that I had hundreds or thousands of customers on, charging each of them twice the price of a VPS to have one tiny slice of this server. And yeah, that was thousands of users on one database instance and one Apache instance. And, if they were lucky, 4 hard drives in some kind of RAID to get some performance and some redundancy out of it. But yeah, I think in most cases, the embedded database makes more sense until you're getting to a scale where you want the database to have much beefier resources. And that's generally not the type of workload most people have nowadays. You kind of either have a tiny workload where you could be one of 1,000 people on a single database server and it's fine. And so you might as well just embed it, database in each one of these things. Or your database is massive and runs its own whole cluster of servers because any one machine isn't big enough or redundant enough.
Right, well, we better get out of here then. Remember, show@2.5admins.com if you want to send any questions or your feedback. You can find me at joelrest.com/mastodon.
You can find me at mercenarysysadmin.com.
And I'm at Alan Jude.
We'll see you next week.